Record click.
Yes.
All right, then we're going to get started with the UnScared webinar on health. Before we can get started, we have to discuss first about what health really means, and this really depends on the context. So for someone who has a specific disease, health may be managing that specific disease. Someone who is without disease may invest time in trying to prevent diseases. This could be through body weight management, don't be overweight. It could be through using supplements, adjusting the nutrition, exercising, and so on. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through a few segments, and through different lenses, we're going to take a look at the aspect of health. For the purpose of this webinar, when it comes to health, we are mostly talking about either preventing disease, in the sense of lowering the risk that you have it, and to improve overall well-being. So that's pretty vague. That's why we did it in different segments, and they will all have a different context from which we will look at health. But for the purpose of this webinar, the absence of disease is probably the primary factor. What we're going to do is we're going to talk about a bunch of subjects, and we're going to see what makes up health. I put them under 4 different segments: nutrition, so what do we eat, drink, supplements included as well. Exercise, this is not just about training. This is not about doing some intense workout. It also is about, taking the car versus taking a bike to work, going for walks throughout the day, so on. Stress management, that's pretty broad, but it really just boils down to stress versus recovery. Could be in terms of training, like you have a heavy workout, you need to recover. It is also in the context of psychological stress, for example, from work. And then there is the part self-care, which is not talked about often enough, in my opinion. And then we have some time for extra questions at the end. So let's just jump into the first one, probably the one that is most controversial. And the key point here is nobody seems to agree. And there's a bunch of reasons for that. But mostly the primary thing here is probably that there is so much emotion involved in nutrition. Some people think it is about the Dunning-Kruger effect. For those who don't know, Dunning-Kruger means that if you know a little bit about something, you think you know a lot. The more you learn, the more modest you are. So basically, it's about people overestimating how much they know. The thing is, we see this a lot in nutrition. You see a lot of people who don't know a lot about nutrition, but they think they know everything. But we don't see that in a lot of other fields. So in the field of mathematics, for example, how many people do you know that know a little bit about mathematics and think they know exactly how it is? Not so much. So it is less likely that it is about the Dunning-Kruger effect. It is more likely that it has to do with emotion, with some sociological factors. For those that are familiar with it, you have things like in and out groups, which refers to attaching more value to things that are close to you culturally and less to what other people do. So if you're part of a CrossFit box and everyone there does paleo, or everyone there does the zone diet, you are more likely to think it is a good thing than if someone from a different gym does it.
Yeah, like Muslims.
So a lot of factors influencing why people disagree. But there are some things that we do know, and there's a lot of things that we don't know. So let's start with a few things that we do know about. The first one is about weight management. And for weight management, it is somewhat clear-ish. If you are overweight, you have a bigger chance of certain diseases. Now, even if you are very tall or if you are very muscular, there is still more strain on, for example, heart, lungs, and so on. That doesn't mean it's unhealthy to be muscular. It just means that body weight is always a factor, even if you are not obese. Now, obesity is, of course, the most obvious thing, because obesity is related to, higher risk of cancer, higher risk of diabetes, and so on. So weight management is a big factor in being healthy when it comes to nutrition. Now, what way you do that is, of course, a factor, but probably less of a factor, considering that we see a lot of people having very different diets, still managing their weight and still being fine, right? So weight management is one important thing. The second one is about habit versus nutrition. This is more of a conceptual thing that's very important for people to realize. A lot of people talk about nutrition, so they talk about a specific diet or a specific product, when they should probably be looking at habits. So if you drink alcohol, for example, it's not one beer that's going to kill you. It is the habit of drinking every single day or drinking excessively that's going to do something to your health or your sports results. It's the same with the supplement. Supplement does not do anything if you only take it once every 4 weeks, unless it is a supplement specifically made for that. So if you go to the doctor and you get a vitamin B12 injection because you have a chronic deficiency, yeah, then you take it once every 4 to 6 weeks. But normally, if you take a supplement like creatine or something, you need to do it on a consistent basis for it to work. This works with junk food, this works with healthy stuff. Everything is about the habit and not about one specific product in isolation. The third point is relationship with food. Luckily, there's more attention for this nowadays. Back in the days, it was all about, this diet is good, this diet is bad, this product is good, this product is bad. Nowadays, we look more and more at relationship with food, because what use is your healthy smoothie if you hate your life every day because you wake up with a gross smoothie and you go to a party, but yeah, you're not really allowed to have alcohol or sweets, so you bring your own stuff with you and you end up hating everything. Or what if you do eat that bar of chocolate or you do have a few beers and you feel guilty afterwards? You're doing something you enjoy, you feel guilty afterwards. That's something you want to avoid. That has to do with the relationship with food. If you have a healthy relationship with food, that means it's easier for you to deal with food in general, to deal with food choices in general. Then you have something we refer to as disordered eating, and then you have eating disorders, of course, on the other end of the spectrum. And an eating disorder is more obvious in the sense that you can easily diagnose it. But having a bad relationship with food is something that is on a very wide spectrum, which starts with I am uncomfortable with eating junk food, all the way up to stressing out over going to parties because, what if they don't have healthy food there? So why is this important? Well, the mental health part. So the things that I mentioned before about weight management, I mostly talk about physical aspects of health. Mental health is very important here as well. Before we go on to the other two segments, does anyone have any questions regarding the first three subjects?
No.
Nothing?
No.
Cool. That means we can go on.
Maar het gaat goed hoor.
Huh?
Gaat goed.
Cool. All right. So for the first one, the fourth one, it's basically, it refers to what I said in the second point. People have questions about specific supplements or specific compounds in food. They may ask about certain supplements like, okay, what does whey protein do for my body, for recovery? Or maybe someone has a question regarding a specific compound, like, okay, what about lycopene that we find in tomatoes? What about vitamin D supplements and so on? They are often very valid questions because we know that some supplements can help for your health, for sports performance, some do not, and a lot of them we're not entirely sure about. The thing is, all these things do not matter that much if you do not do it consistently and if it does not fit in the grand scheme of things. Simple example. Creatine monohydrate is a supplement that helps you with explosive movements and especially repeating them. So if you have an explosive sport like sprinting or Olympic weightlifting, but also for recovery in between regular strength training or even CrossFit or whatever, creatine monohydrate can help with a better recovery, sports performance, and some studies even suggest that it's good for brain health in aging people. So for young people, not so much, but as you get older, your brain deteriorates. Taking creatine may slow down the deterioration of your brain function.
If we talk about creatine, do we usually refer to creatine monohydrate?
Yeah, specifically creatine monohydrate. I'll get back to that in a bit, but right now I'm talking specifically about creatine monohydrate. That is the best researched one. So we know it works with in sports for the vast majority of people. Normally we see around half people having benefits. And when they take creatine monohydrate with a large amount of carbohydrates, we see it shoot up. And even people that do not respond suddenly respond to it.
Yeah, that's me.
There are some exceptions, usually people that we refer to as non-responders, possibly people who already get enough creatine from their diet and so on. But in general, it's a supplement that is cheap and probably works well, even though the effect is small, there is an effect. Awesome.
Okay.
Creatine, for the purpose of, for example, improving your strength training, does not help if your strength training sucks. If you're lazy in your workouts, if you have a shitty program, it does not work if your nutrition is absolutely horrible. It does not work if your stress management sucks, if you do not recover and sleep properly, and so on. So even if we talk about a specific supplement, about a specific compound in your food, you always need to look at the big picture. There's no use in taking creatine if all the other stuff sucks so bad that you're just sabotaging yourself. Why is this so relevant? Because a lot of people do have suboptimal or even lousy training programs. They underestimate their sleep quality and so on. So what happens is they are looking for a golden bullet, a specific diet, a specific supplement, and so on. And basically what you're doing is you're wasting your money and your effort there when you should have been putting effort in something else. Something we call majoring in the minors, which means you put a lot of effort into the small things that only add a little bit, like a supplement, and you forget about the main things, which is basically just proper training, proper recovery, and so on. Regarding what you mentioned earlier, are we talking about creatine monohydrate? Yes, because the vast majority of studies that have been done on creatine monohydrate, and all the other variation, often in the form of certain liquids that you put in shakes, for example, they either do not have the same effects or we're not sure about it. And these days, creatine studies are less and less because it's such a cheap supplement. There's very little money to be made, and we already have heaps and heaps of studies. So it's unlikely that we're going to find something new in terms of creatine. So if you want to use creatine, I would say use creatine monohydrate. If you pay for more than 15 euros per half a kilo or 400 grams or so, if you're paying a lot more than that, you're probably getting ripped off. So yeah, it's certainly something I recommend, but only if you have nutrition, sleep, training, at least at a decent level. Any other compound, any other supplement? The answer always starts with the same. It depends. How's your training, nutrition, and sleep? Are they in order? Yes, then we can take a look at it. The only exceptions would be if you have a clear deficiency. So yes, if you have a certain deficiency in magnesium, for example, then of course a magnesium supplement may help. Although one could argue that getting it from nutrition is better, but it's not always feasible. So a simple example would be, let's say that you are intolerant to FODMAPs. FODMAPs are specific types of carbohydrates, and they can give you very serious gastrointestinal distress. So
I'm on a low FODMAP diet actually.
Oh, cool. Well, then you know how that works. People who have who do not take FODMAPs very well, they can get stomach aches, irritations around the bowel, lots of chronic inflammations from it, and so on. Now, imagine that you have this issue and you cannot eat bread, for example. Now, let's imagine that you are also vegan or vegetarian, or otherwise you absolutely hate fish. Bread and fish, for most people, are the main sources of iodine in our diet. That means that if you are a vegan who also cannot eat bread, you need to find your iodine somewhere else, so you probably need to take supplements. That is a very specific case where a supplement may actually make a big difference, aside from nutrition, because if you can't have bread, if you can't have fish or shellfish and so on, you're very limited with options. That is when supplements start to shine. But then you have a specific deficiency. So I'm not a big fan of just taking random supplements just in case. I would rather look at what you actually need, and of course, how's your rest and nutrition and training and so on. So what I'm saying here is not necessarily about a specific supplement. It's more about a train of thought and the way you look at supplements and nutrition in general. Does anyone have any questions regarding that part? Or questions about a specific supplement, which is also fine.
No.
Cool. If you guys are interested in this, UnScared also has 3 nutrition webinars. Each are like, I think, 1.5 hours each. So if you want to go more in depth on nutrition, take a look at those. They're free. They're on YouTube. The first one is more about the physical side. The second is more about health versus performance. And the third one is more about the psychological part, the behavioral part, and how to apply things in daily life. So if you're interested, you might want to take a look there. I do have a few examples here of specific things regarding health and nutrition that I just want to go over really quickly. At least the first 3, they are very interesting because they get brought up so much recently. If you have more questions about specific parts of nutrition, obviously ask me, or I will refer you to the seminars on YouTube that we have. GMOs are one example. Genetically modified organisms, which basically refers to humans adjusting something in our food that we grow before we eat it at some point. Now, some people are very worried about GMOs because they may be unhealthy or even dangerous to some extent. The big issue with GMOs is that a lot of people don't know what GMOs are, and of course that makes it scary. And a big issue in GMOs is the fact that there's different types of GMOs. So back in the day, and I'm talking thousands of years ago, bananas had these big seeds inside them. Strawberries were not as sweet as they are nowadays. Through crossbreeding and through only taking certain strains of the grains and the fruits and the vegetables we cultivated, at some point we got something called artificial selection. Artificial selection just means I have two different strains of banana from the wild. This one sucks, this one is awesome, I'm going to cultivate the awesome one. And over the course of many generations, you get a different type of banana. So you can Google it if you want to look at different types of bananas throughout thousands of years ago. Some of the wild bananas still exist, or other wild vegetables or fruits. We just don't eat them because they're not as tasty, not as big, not as easy to grow, and so on. That's artificial selection, and it's actually not that unnatural in the sense that we don't do anything to the fruit itself, but it's still GMO. So saying that you are against GMOs, you don't want to eat GMOs, means you can literally not eat any banana that we sell nowadays, that you cannot eat strawberries that we have today, and so on. So it's something to keep in mind. Now, what most people are afraid of is something we call genetic engineering, and genetic engineering is a bit more complicated. I am certainly no scientist, so Google it if you want to go more in depth, or better, have a full-on education in that direction. But basically what it means is that we adjust the genetic side, the DNA and so on, inside a piece of fruit or a vegetable so that it gets different properties. So that could mean that if we have potatoes, for example, and potatoes may be sensitive to certain types of rot, certain types of bacteria, certain types of fungi. We can adjust something in, at the molecular level in that specific type of potato, so that it's more resistant. That means that if it is more resistant, we don't have to use as many pesticides. So is it dangerous? Well, we have to use less pesticide, and we know that overuse of pesticides can be very harmful. So this is a way that actually makes it more healthy in theory. Now, the thing is, for some of these things, we've known for decades that it's fine. But of course, we're constantly innovating in this thing. So we don't know if at some point there is going to be some sort of genetically engineered strawberry or whatever that's going to cause us health issues over the course of 20, 30 years. That's something we just don't know. From what it looks like now, GMOs in general seem to be fine, but we don't know yet what works in the long run. It's just that it's unlikely that it's going to be unhealthy, but it's certainly possible, because if there is a new type of genetic strain that we produce, we just don't know what it's going to be in 30 years. Did it increase the risk of cancer? Well, we don't know yet. So are GMOs unhealthy? We don't know. Unlikely, but still possible. Does anyone have any questions regarding GMOs?
No.
No. Yeah. What does it stand for again?
Genetically modified organism.
Okay. Yeah.
And that's the catch-all phrase. And if you want to know more about specific types, so artificial selection is like the not super interesting one. That just means you pick one potato over another. That's basically what we do with dogs, for example. You pick dogs that you want to breed with, and the unhealthier ones you don't breed with them. And then there's genetic engineering, and genetic engineering is the one that people think is scary. One reason was at some point they put some part of DNA from fish, they put that in strawberries. And people are like, holy shit, that's super weird. You can't do that. It's unhealthy. It's unnatural, so and so. But it doesn't really say much. And the example that I usually use is that our DNA, for example, matches with monkeys for like 95%, with other animals for 85 to 90%. I think we match with birds for like 80, 85%. So speaking at that level, we are like 85% the same as birds, even though in the way we experience it, we're very different from birds. So those are numbers that can seem very interesting, and it all sounds very scary, like, oh no, it's like fish genes and strawberries. It doesn't say anything. And to really understand what it means, you really have to delve into the subject, and it's very complicated and it's interesting. But if you want to know more about that, definitely Google it, find some courses on GMOs and so on. The second one is about natural food versus synthetic food. Now, for natural versus synthetic, a lot of people think natural is better. And part of it is probably, again, the emotional part. It's some sort of romanticized idea that natural is better, but in practice, it depends. Avocados come from South America, but nowadays they are being produced all over Africa and Europe, for example. Well, Europe not so much, less, but we eat them a lot in Europe anyway. But we've only been doing so for a few hundred years. So in that sense, eating avocados is not natural for us because we're not accustomed to doing it. Still, we consider it a superfood. Why? Because we looked at what's inside an avocado and is it healthy for us and so on. Not because we are accustomed to doing it. Because by that logic, if you look at the other way around, in Asia, a lot of people are lactose intolerant. In Europe, I think like 70–80% can easily take lactose. So a lot of people in Asia, the vast majority, cannot handle cow's milk because they get all these stomach issues and bowel issues. Why? Because we have been doing this for, I don't know how long, but many, many, many years and generations even. So we are used to consuming dairy, whereas a lot of people over in Asia are not. So for them, it is less natural and it is bad for them. Avocados for us are less natural, but they're not bad for us. So that's just one example of how natural is not necessarily better or worse. And of course, there's many obvious examples. You have mushrooms that are all natural, and some of them are poisonous, and some of them are not. You know, synthetic, same thing. In nutrition, when it comes to synthetic stuff, we use certain methods of processing to get certain harmful bacteria or stuff like that out of our food. So again, is synthetic better or not? Well, sometimes it is, sometimes it is not. However, for practical reasons, it could be a good guideline to say eat mostly natural. Why? Because it steers you away from typical junk foods that have lots of calories and very few minerals and vitamins. It automatically steers you to foods that are not calorie dense. So when it comes to weight management, eating more natural can already help. So even though strictly speaking, natural is not necessarily healthier, it can indirectly help your health to mostly eat natural foods. And natural in this sense just means unprocessed. Any questions about this part specifically?
No.
All right. Well, then we're going to go to the third one, which is the last one, unless you guys want to go into the other ones as well. So one criticism on food that has come up over recent years is that soil quality is less. So that means there are fewer minerals and vitamins in our food. And that's a very interesting one because it is true that in a lot of regions in the world, we basically overused the soil. So the vegetables now, or the fruits now, may have fewer vitamins and minerals than they used to have like 50 years ago. And in a lot of areas, that's true. The thing is, we know that in the Netherlands, like 80% of the people does not eat 200 grams or more of vegetables. At least this was the case a few years back. I'm not sure if it's different now. Why are we worrying about 5% less vitamin C if we don't even eat the fruits and vegetables we need to begin with? So there's a difference between something being true and something being useful. It is true that we have fewer vitamins and minerals in there. It just doesn't matter. We need to focus on the habit part rather than the nutrition part when it comes to this subject. And it goes for a lot of other stuff as well. If you look at the mercury in fish, for example, it's true that predatory fish have more mercury in them. It's methyl mercury. And if you get that inside your body a lot, it's harmful. However, we usually consume it in low quantities, and there are also benefits to eating fish. So it is true that mercury is bad for you and that it is in fish, especially in predatory fish, especially higher in the food chain, but it's not super relevant. So again, I gave a few examples, but this is not necessarily about these examples. It's more about a way of looking at these subjects rather than about the specific example, because I'm pretty sure you guys can think of an exception on one of these things. If I say like, okay, yeah, natural is often better, and you can come up with an example. Lower soil quality, yeah, okay, but what if I do eat my vegetables? Sure, there's always a certain context that you need to know of before you can answer questions regarding these subjects. But as a general rule of thumb, it is more about the proper habits and the grand scheme of things rather than worrying about every single detail. Because if you worry about the detail in favor over the important stuff, that's when you're majoring in the minors. That's when you're putting in a lot of effort for possibly no results at all. Right, so this is, in a very, very, very short nutshell, a relationship between nutrition and health. So if there's any questions, please let me know. Otherwise, I'm going to move on to the exercise part.
So what is, I was wondering, what is usually, of course, it really differs per person and per their goals, but what is the most common challenge that you see with the people that you coach?
Habit, absolutely. The thing is that motivation in general usually lasts maybe up to 8 weeks. Like everyone can follow a nutrition program for a few weeks. That's not that hard. And regardless of what you put in there, there's going to be a point where motivation wavers. It could be because people lose interest, because people always respond very well to novelty. You get a new training program, a new sport, a new diet, and people are enthusiastic. That means they're going to be compliant. They're going to adhere to the program. That means they're going to see results. That's why almost every diet nowadays has results. Just look on Amazon or bol.com, whatever. And for any diet book you see, you'll always see tons of testimonials. That's because in the short run, almost everything works. However, after the first 2 months, you see the first drop off, people losing motivation. You see this with people who start training with, New Year's resolutions on the 1st of January. And within 2 months, most of those people have dropped off already. Then there's a second cutoff at around half a year. And that's usually with people who are still motivated in the long run, but just can't stick to it. This is something we see, for example, with low carb diets. People after half a year tend to fall off the bandwagon. And the final cutoff is usually after around 2 years, and almost no one can manage most of the diets and training programs and so on. Why? Because they are so focused on that diet, on that training program, or on a singular goal, an end goal, like losing weight. When we're talking about weight management, 90 to 95% of all the people that lose weight gain that weight and more after 2 years. So if you did a diet, a lot of people have done diets before they come to me and they ask me about, okay, well, what should I do? And I'll usually ask them like, okay, have you done diets before? Yes. Did you get results? Yes. Okay, then why are you here? Well, because you can just do the same thing you did back then. Why not? So the issue is usually not the specific diet or the specific thing. It is usually forming the habit and keeping it that way. So by far, managing motivation versus habit and so on is by far the number one thing people have issues with. Second, maybe people having a bad idea of what they're actually doing. So they might tell me, oh, I eat only 1,000 calories a day, but they're not. Or I have a very healthy diet, but they don't. That might be number two, but number one is by far the habit part. Does that answer your question?
Yes, definitely. Thanks.
Cool. More questions regarding nutrition?
Yeah, about the mercury in fish.
Yeah.
I remember tuna. I heard a story about tuna that contains a lot of mercury.
Yeah, so tuna is a predatory fish. If you look up a list on predatory fish, like the food chain, you can see like how high up they are. And, the higher they are, the more mercury they have. So if you have a small fish, it has mercury. A bigger fish eats it, so it gets more mercury. Another bigger fish eats that, and so on. That's why at the top of the food chain, you see more mercury. And tuna is a predatory fish high up in that food chain. That's why there's a relatively large amount of mercury in there. Some brands claim that their tuna has less mercury, which may certainly be possible. But you kind of fix this issue by having a varied diet. So usually when I want someone to be healthy in terms of nutrition and they want a general guideline, it's mostly unprocessed, varied, not too much, and enjoy food, obviously.
How much fish do you recommend people should eat?
Oh, the standard recommendation of fatty fish twice a week is fine. Even though there is some discussion on, just like with the lower soil quality, salmon these days, especially the, how'd you say it, like the factory farmed salmon, has less omega-3 fatty acids, which is one of the things we need for health.
Yeah.
Even though it's less, eating fatty fish twice a week is still enough. Now, if you eat lean fish, like, cod, halibut, and well, what is it? The white fish, basically, the low-fat fish, kabeljau. If you eat those things, you would have, in some cases, less chance of getting mercury in. On the other side, it also has less fat, so it also has less of those health benefits. Doesn't mean it's bad, it just means that, it's not part of the 2 times a week recommendation.
Okay,
Ja.
clear.
Zou het anders zijn voor jou als een beetje geleden?
No, I think
I have another question.
Yeah.
You gave an example before about if someone is vegan and was following the diet that Sjoerd is following,
Yeah.
there might be like a deficiency for iodine or something. let's say that you have a different kind of diet,
Yeah.
and without knowing, you're creating a certain deficiency.
Yeah.
What would you advise to know what kind of deficiency you may have if you have one?
Well, that's very hard because that depends. If you have specific complaints, if you have specific issues in terms of, maybe you're feeling tired or whatever, then that may be an indication that you need to have some blood work done, which means you go to the doctor and you tell them, hey, I'm feeling like this and that, and then they can test your blood, for example, for hemoglobin, iron, ferritin, or there may be other issues. Maybe you feel like you have low testosterone levels, so you can have that tested and so on. But if you do not have anything specific that bothers you, you have very little reason to go to the doctor and have your blood work done. So there is no real way to know if you have a deficiency unless you get it tested. In the Netherlands, if you have specific complaints, the doctor can have you, basically it can have the insurance pay for you, but if you don't have any specific complaints, you have to pay for it yourself. And it's usually like a base pay of like 20, 30 euros. And then for every mineral or vitamin or hormone, you have to pay extra. So testing certain things like your iron or HbA1c, which is what they test for diabetes, that was not very expensive, but hormones can be super expensive. I think if you just want to have your testosterone tested, it's already a total of like 100, 150 euros. Imagine if you want to have several things tested.
Yeah.
So yes, you can have blood work done if you have any specific complaints, or if you suspect maybe something wrong. If you are vegan, for example, and you suspect you may have an iodine deficiency or a B12 deficiency, in my experience, doctors are usually willing to help with that because you want to prevent something bad from happening. And then the doctor will know what to focus on. So in vegetarians or vegans, especially, they will, I would assume, they will know that they have to test for B12, ferritin, hemoglobin, possibly, and maybe specific minerals depending on the rest of your food. So like I said, if you don't eat bread either, you may want to get iodine checked, as an example.
Okay.
Cool.
Yes, thanks.
More questions regarding nutrition? 9.
No.
Cool. We're going to go to the next one. Segment 2, exercise. So a key point here is exercise is actually very easy if you enjoy doing it, but many do not. So we have a lot of recommendations on what we should do to be healthy in terms of sports. But again, if you cannot stick to it, it doesn't really matter. Basically, you can be a lot healthier if you do daily walks or do strength training and so on for a while. You get healthier, but all those health effects are reversed if you stop doing it. So basically, you need to keep doing it for the rest of your life. Now, if you absolutely hate strength training, then you're probably not gonna stick to it. So you should be wondering whether you should actually do it, or should you not invest that time in other types of exercise that are also useful. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through a few segments regarding exercise, why it's important, and also like super general recommendations. Obviously, we're not going to make a whole training program here, just to give you an idea of how to use exercise for health. All around, regarding all these things, keep in mind, you have to be able to stick to it. So that means you need to either find it fun, or it needs to be important enough for you to invest time and energy. First one is strength training. Strength training has a bunch of benefits, among which are stronger bones, more muscle mass and strength, especially at a later age, that becomes very important. But of course, it also has carryover to daily life, which means, I don't know, moving house or carrying heavy groceries. Those are mostly practical things, but they do add to quality of life. But especially as you get older, strength training is incredibly important to prevent sarcopenia. And sarcopenia basically means you lose bone and muscle mass as you get older. And you can reverse this with strength training to some extent, or you can even build strength and bone mass and muscle mass at a later age if you're a beginner. But even if you're already very fit, you can at least prevent yourself from falling apart at some point, to some extent. Just strength training once or twice a week, your whole body can already make a big difference. Should you train more? You could, but training more also requires more energy, time, money, and so on. Plus, the more hours you spend in the sport, the bigger your injury risk. That's one of the big correlations with injuries, is the overall training volume. So if I train twice per week instead of 6, I may get a certain amount of strength and muscle and so on. if I'm going to train 3 times as much, I'm not going to get 3 times as strong. I'm going to be a bit stronger because the first time you train is the biggest benefit. Second time, a bit less. Third, a bit less, and so on. But for performance, which is not health, for performance, it may be very good to train 6 times a week. But there's so much extra volume that you also increase the risk of injury. So for strength training, once or twice a week at a high intensity, and that is of course a very relative term, but you have to work hard, and that can make a huge difference already, purely from a health standpoint. Does anyone have any questions regarding strength training?
Are you familiar with greasing the groove?
Yes.
What do you think about it?
I'm assuming you're talking about the neurological part, right? Like doing a movement often, but not going super hard?
Exactly.
Yeah, so that also works. But basically what you need to do is you need a certain stimulus. And that stimulus needs to be big enough for your body to adapt. And the adaptation could be getting stronger, which is neurological. And you can do that with the greasing the groove principle. You can get your bones stronger, and getting your bones stronger requires a certain amount of loading. So for example, a barbell back squat will help your bones get stronger because there's a lot of axial loading. There's load on top of you. Now, if I were to do back squats very light, that could be great for explosiveness, like the neurological part, the greasing the groove, but slightly less for increasing strength of your bones. Now, the question, of course, would be, how heavy do you have to go then? And we don't know, because the greasing the groove principle is fine, but it's still a lot of volume. So is that good? At what point does it become beneficial for the neurological part only, or to the physical part as well? And where is the cutoff for increase of injury risk? And that's the thing we don't really know. That makes it a bit tricky. But as a general rule of thumb, you could do the whole greasing the groove thing, but the big benefit of greasing the groove is the neurological part, which is why weightlifters tend to snatch, clean, and jerk like 6 to 10 workouts a week, because the load is relatively low and they need to get very good at a very specific movement. So that is very sport specific. But for health, how good do you really need to be at a barbell back squat to be healthy? We don't really need to. There's absolutely no place in nature, for example, where we have loaded squats. We use it as a rest position. Look at Asia, for example. They have different hip structure. It's very normal there. Also culturally, it's very normal there to sit in a squat position. That's their resting position. That's not something they load. Even with toddlers, if you have like 2 or 3 year olds, they often sit in a squat position. You see them playing in a squat position. Take a look at how they stand up. They don't stand up like a squat like we do with the back squat. Their hips come up because it's easier, and then they stand up. It becomes a hinge. It becomes a hip movement. If you look at anyone who is relaxed and they stand up, their butt comes up first, and they hinge themselves. They deadlift themselves up. Why? Because that is the most natural thing we do. When do we see powerful squats in nature? When we jump. But then you don't go all the way down. You make a half squat and you explode into the air. So if we're talking about natural, and again, natural is not the same as healthy, but if we're talking about natural, you don't have to be very good at a specific movement. You need to do something that carries over to daily life. That turns natural into healthy. I probably could have been more concise about that, but did that make sense?
Yes.
Yes, you did.
Okay.
Very
But
interesting.
the part of the question I didn't get an answer on was like, if I would, for example, have a pull-up bar in my house, I do, and I would do like 3 sets a day instead of 3 big workouts during the week. What would give me the most strength?
I have absolutely no idea.
Okay.
Because there's a lot of factors in there. But the primary factor that we do know is that there's actually a study that came out recently, but that was about muscle mass, not about strength, that it probably doesn't matter that much as long as you maintain your volume. So let's say that you need 15 sets per week, right, of pull-ups to improve properly without hurting yourself. So you need 15 sets. You could do that in 1 workout, or in 2, or in 3, or in 5 workouts, like you just said, like you do 3 sets for 5 days in a row, something like that. In all those situations, you would have the same amount of volume. But doing 15 sets in 1 workout is mentally, of course, very boring, but it's probably not efficient, because after like a bunch of sets, your performance is going to go down. So the quality of the sets is going down. So ideally, you would spread it out over several workouts. But then, of course, you have to look at your recovery. Can you recover within 2 days? Okay, then maybe you can do spread over 3 workouts. Or do you recover easily from 3 sets? Well, then you could just do it every day, like you just described. So right now, what I lean towards, and again, this is something that is discussed a lot, I lean towards you need a certain amount of volume and quality and intensity in a week. And you need to divide it in a way that is manageable for you in terms of recovery, energy investment, and so on. So if you can properly manage 3 sets every day, that will probably give you the same results as if you can manage 3 workouts with 5 sets. But one is more practical in terms of time, and one may be more fun, and one maybe for some other reason better. But purely from a strength and hypertrophy standpoint, so muscle mass, it is likely that it does not matter as long as you equate volume and quality of the volume. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does.
Awesome.
Thank you.
More question regarding strength? No.
No.
We're going to move on to cardio. So basically the big benefit of cardio, there's actually several, but the big benefit is heart health in general. So your heart, your veins, your lungs, they perform better. But there are also some effects that are less known in terms of brain function, for example. So walking and running, they give small shocks to the brain that help circulation and improve brain function. So in the long run, for brain health, which improves things like focus and so on, running and walking could be better than riding a bicycle. However, when we're talking about lung function and so on, you can swim, you can bike, you can run, and so on. Well, how often do you need to do this? Well, it depends on what you're actually trying to achieve. But if the intensity is low enough, you could do it every day. If you go for higher intensity, it's usually just 1 or twice a week. And if we're talking purely from a health standpoint, I would say 1 or twice a week, at least 40 minutes at a low intensity, could already make a serious dent in improving cardio. I'm going to go straight into the next one because it relates. Your all-round movement frequency, which means how much do you move throughout the day and throughout the week, also has an impact on these same things. So one example was they at some point did a study where they had people do 3 intense workouts in a week, or they did not do that, but they had to move for 5 minutes after every hour of work because they all had sedentary lifestyles, they didn't move much. And when it comes to blood sugar regulation, which kind of relates to diabetes and so on, those who just moved every hour had better blood sugar levels on average than those who trained really hard 3 times a week. It does not mean that training hard is not useful. It just means that it's very important to move throughout the day because of the circulation, from the thing on brain function, the blood sugar levels. It also stimulates the heart and lungs again, especially if you do it at a brisk pace, like walking upstairs or brisk walking. So as a general guideline, I usually tell people to move every part of the day. So move in the morning, in the afternoon, in the evening. Could be as simple as a 10-minute brisk walk. That's kind of like the minimum. But of course, a normal workout also counts. If you have a job where you walk a lot, it also counts. But spreading that out over the day can help with circulation. And add 1 or 2 cardio sessions of at least 40 minutes for additional effects like burning more fat around the stomach area. It doesn't give you a six-pack, unfortunately, but it does burn more fat around the organs. And it's the fat around the organs that can cause chronic inflammation, which can cause type 2 diabetes, for example. So that's why you can have people who are relatively overweight but have very little fat around the organs. They still do not have a bigger chance of type 2 diabetes because it depends on where you store the fat. It's one of the reasons why people nowadays say that belly fat is more harmful than fat in general. It's because of the fat around the organs that causes the inflammation, which can cause things like type 2 diabetes. So long story short, move a lot. Add in some cardio 1 or 2 a week for at least 40 minutes, and you already have a very solid baseline. Any questions regarding these two?
No.
Cool, awesome. Injury prevention. Well, we have a few factors that influence injuries. On a grander scale, there's 3 elements. One is physical. The physical part is the easy part, because if I cut off my hand, it's probably going to hurt because there's a physical reason for me to have pain. Then there is a mental part. If I'm afraid of pain, I'm more likely to have pain. Then there is a neurological part. For example, if the quality of your sleep is bad, you are more sensitive to pain. Now, all these three come together in many ways, because if I cut off my hand, there's a physical issue, but of course, a signal is sent through my nerves to my brain before I actually have pain. So it's always an overlap between these things. But the same thing goes for injuries. There's a lot of people who have lower back pain when nothing really broke down. The spine is functioning properly, no issue there. It still hurts. So that means there's something neurological going on. Basically, if you do strength training, your pain threshold improves. That means you don't feel pain as easy. Doing cardio training also improves your pain tolerance, which means once you have pain, you can push through it easier. So that's interesting that they both have these different elements. But of course, they can both help with, well, pretty much anything. But it also lowers the chance of you having pain when nothing is actually wrong. Well, then there's the physical part. You can overstrain your tendons and your ligaments, of course, and they need to recover properly. If I do a squat, there's a heavy load on my knees. This is fine as long as my knees can recover from it. How do you know if your knees recover from it? Well, you don't always know, because your muscles can, they usually recover within a few hours to a few days. But tendons, if you damage them enough, or ligaments, that can take months, at some point up to 10 months before they completely recover. That is why you preemptively want to take it a bit easier on certain movements. So one example is in certain training programs for strength, you may have a deload week every 4th or 5th or 6th or 8th week, which means you have a week where you take it a bit easier to give a little extra recovery to your joints. So injury prevention basically boils down to a lot of factors, but in terms of training, a good training program helps a lot. And of course, there's technique. The technique is a bit complicated, because you can get away with very weird, ugly technique as long as your body is accustomed to it. Because basically an injury happens when your stimulus is too big for your recovery capacity. So you can have people with awesome technique hurting themselves, or people with shitty technique not hurting themselves. I've seen both plenty of times. So that means that you need to make sure that stress and recovery are properly balanced, even if technique sucks. Of course, if technique is good, you're usually more efficient in what you do. So we always emphasize proper technique. But it does not mean that good technique is automatically sort of a guarantee that you don't get injured. And bad technique is also not a guarantee that you're going to hurt yourself, right? Like deadlifting with a round back, it can be very problematic for some people, and it can be completely fine for some others. But in general, the stiffer the spine, the better for performance. So it's usually best to teach a straight back anyway, even if you're not going to hurt yourself. But what we don't want to do is we don't want to make people afraid of moving because, oh no, my technique isn't perfect, now I'm going to hurt myself. Because what happens then? You become afraid of pain. So you're going to be more likely to experience pain, because every time you feel something, you're like, oh, there was something weird happening. Plus, you have the issue that you may be afraid of pushing it harder in training, and pushing it harder in training is something you need to do if you want to, get super strong or super fit or whatever. So yes, have a proper training program and take the exercise seriously, and you probably have a lot discovered already. Any questions regarding anything regarding exercise?
Yes. Could you tell something more about the deload week? Like you said something about after 7 or 8 weeks.
Yeah.
And how do you, what do you do in a deload week? Do you do maybe 70% of your weights off, or nothing at all? Or
yeah, so this depends on a lot of things. First of all, your sport. It also depends on how much you do in a week. Because if you only do some casual strength training and casual cardio once or twice a week each, you may not need to deload at all, because the strain on your body is not that big.
Right.
If you train 10 times a week really hard, you probably need your deloads because you're pushing your body really hard. If you are 18 years old and have good genetics, you don't need a deload. If you're 60 years old and you already have a history of injuries, you need frequent deloads. So there's a very big margin in how often do you need to deload and what do you do. As a general guideline, what I usually do with most people, and again, this is very, very, very broad, I just have people for like a minor deload. It usually means I lower the volume with like a third. So it's the number of sets or the number of workouts or the number of miles. Take off about a third. And in terms of intensity, for half of the week, you just lower the intensity by 1/3, and the other half you just build the intensity back up. This is mostly strength based. For explosive movements, you can go with higher percentages, higher intensity, because the strain is not as big when you do an explosive movement, because there's less absolute weight. And if you're a marathon runner, you may need to deload or taper way longer because there's so much training volume. Like a marathon runner may at some point be doing dozens of miles every week. So before the marathon comes, they need 4 weeks of deloading, tapering, we call it. So all the fatigue is going out of the body. If we're talking about a competition for a weightlifting or powerlifting competition, a deload or a taper in that sense usually is way shorter because there's not so much volume, because it's like 5 to 10 days of tapering, deloading, something like that. So it really depends on the situation. But to put it very black and white, I would usually say take an easy week. So you feel extra strong and fit the week after, then you probably did it right. That's very vague, but that's kind of what it boils down to. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Right. If you want to know more about deloads, you really have to look at your specific situation to make it relevant.
Okay.
Cool. More about exercise.
Yeah. You said something about that if you're going to do squats, you want to take it lightly in the beginning because it causes a lot of strains on your joints and your knees, for example.
Yeah.
Like that, you cannot really train the joints in your knees as much as you can train your muscles, for example. So like, how do you deal with this? Because it's kind of, it can also be genetically, right? That you can only take a certain amount of strain before.
Absolutely.
Before you're fucked, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. Genetics is a big factor in injuries as well. People don't really like to talk about it, but no matter what way you look at it, genetics is always a factor. Basically what it boils down to is you're just going to have less genetic potential. If your joints are not strong enough to withstand hard training, even after you build up slowly, that means you're not ever going to be an elite athlete. That's okay. That's just how we're built. The practical side of your question, like what do you do if your muscles can handle more than your joints? Well, you can do two things. You can either let the muscles decide and accept that you're going to be in pain, which may be necessary if you're an elite athlete and you really have your goals set high, or you'll have to accept that you maybe are not going to be as muscular, but at least you're going to be pain-free. That's kind of what it boils down to. When it comes to beginning a program, that just means start easy, because your muscles grow pretty quickly, or you get strong pretty quickly at start, so you don't have to push yourself as hard. So a lot of people can get away with just training 2 or 3 times a week when they start, but an elite athlete may have to train like 10 times a week. You build that up slowly, so your joints have the opportunity to kind of adapt themselves to the heavy strain. So there's 2 sides to your question. One is start easy and slowly build up. That's what you're going to get strong of. It's not one really hard workout that's going to make you strong. It's slowly building up that's eventually going to make you strong. And regarding the other side of your question, this is just your genetic potential, and you have to make a decision at some point. Or you need to do something like use drugs. If you use growth hormone, for example, which falls under doping, your joints are going to recover way quicker, allowing you to do a lot more. But of course, all sorts of doping have their own risks in terms of health. Then there's the ethical part. If you're in competitions, of course. Then there's, of course, the law. Like usually it's illegal, except for a few certain things. But they are certainly an option, practically speaking. It's just that you have to accept the risks that you get then. So I don't know if they made a lot of strides in studies on growth hormone types nowadays, but back in the days, last time I read up on it, which is years back, growth hormone greatly increased the risk of cancer. But at the same time, your joints heal incredibly fast. So if you are in a situation where your joints cannot keep up with the muscles, then growth hormone would help. But then you increase the chance of cancer. It's a rather complicated subject.
Yeah.
Obviously, I don't recommend it, but purely from a practical standpoint, that is one of the options you have.
Yeah.
Answer your question?
Yeah. Thanks.
Is it true that growth hormone increases when you fast?
But that's kind of negligible. So when you fast for a certain time, certain hormones are being produced more, and you're also becoming more sensitive to other hormones. So growth hormone does increase. It actually always increases when you sleep and you don't eat, and you wake up. Then your growth hormone levels are higher, and you're more sensitive to insulin. So some people will say that you have to postpone your breakfast, so fasting. And what happens then is that your growth hormone levels are higher for longer. But those effects in your hormones are transient. It means it's very short and it's not significant. Just like when you do big, intense lifts, like squats, for example, afterwards your testosterone levels rise. And back in the day, people used to say, well, if you do your bicep curls after squats, your bicep's going to get bigger because more testosterone. But it's such a small amount that it doesn't really matter. If you want an effect from higher testosterone levels, you need to inject it or use any other type. So yes, it is absolutely true. But again, here, the difference between there's a difference between true and useful. So some people are into intermittent fasting, for example. Then I usually just ask them like, okay, so you skip breakfast. And the people get angry, but
yeah,
one of the things.
It's what it boils down to.
Yeah, depending on the variation. I've done several variations in the past. There's also things like eat, stop, eat, which were 1 or 2 times a week. You do not eat for 24 hours. That's very different from lean gains. And lean gains was basically one of the first one that popularized intermittent fasting. And with lean gains, you basically just skip breakfast. You basically had a time frame like between 1 p.m. and 7 p.m. or something, and you would eat. That's kind of everything. So there's a lot of different variations. But the hormonal effects are transient. And a lot of people look at the hormones in isolation, but it's always the whole system, the whole endocrinology of the body that decides what happens. So if you enjoy intermittent fasting, awesome, do it, but don't expect anything magical to happen.
So it's also not necessarily beneficial to have your workout in the morning because you have a higher testosterone level or something?
No, absolutely not. It's just that if you do not feel like having breakfast, you don't need breakfast. They used to say breakfast is the most important meal of the day. If you are used to eating breakfast, I recommend eating breakfast. And if you're not used to eating breakfast or you don't like it, then I would not force feed myself. Again, that's the habit part. Physically speaking, yes, it's useful after 8 hours of sleeping and fasting to have some protein in the morning. Yes, but again, we're not all elite athletes. We don't all have to worry about having breakfast within half an hour of waking up. So again, that really depends on the situation. But there's nothing magical about intermittent fasting, except behavior-wise, it may help you. If it helps you control your calories by just not eating breakfast, yeah, man, sure, go for it. Cool. More questions about exercise?
Are there any foods known to be healthy for your joints and ligaments?
Yes, to a certain extent, because your joints, ligaments, bones, and so on are made of basically what you eat. So of course, protein, calcium, magnesium, vitamin D, they all help with bone health, for example. Protein is necessary for all the tissue in your body, even your hair and skin are made out of protein. There is some research that suggests that collagen might help. And collagen is something you can get from bone broth, for example, or you can just get it from a supplement. Then there's fish oil. So because omega-3, which is in fish oil, can help with joint health. So yes, basically there is some, but assuming you have a varied diet and you include those, it's not like you need a lot of something to improve your joint health. It's just something you need to make sure that you get everything you need. Get your calcium and your magnesium and your vitamin D and your omega-3s, whatever. That will certainly help. But it's not like eating fatty fish 5 times a week is suddenly going to make your joints healthier. It's just that you need to make sure you don't have a deficiency of any of them. So yes and no. Basically, yes.
Thanks, clear.
Cool. More on exercise. All right. Then we're going to pick up the pace a little for the last 2. Stress management. Again, psychological, neurological, biological. It's a pretty complex whole. And it's easily influenced because basically anything that happens around you can have an impact. So I have a few examples that I want to touch upon. Loneliness is one of them. Loneliness does not refer to how many people you have around you, but it's something you experience because you can be lonely even if you have a lot of people around you, or you can be by yourself and feel completely fine. We see with people who are lonely and also who are depressed, they often have high levels of chronic inflammation, which also, for example, influences things like pain in general, recovery from wounds and training and so on. So this is mostly a psychological thing, obviously. So it's psychological, something you experience, and that suddenly impacts the neurological and biological part. It could also work the other way around because depression could be a psychological thing, but there could also be a biological factor underlying, which is then influencing the psychological part. That makes this a pretty complex thing. The second one, balance between stress and recovery. Well, you need to make sure you balance those properly, not just in training. It's not just about training and then eating and resting properly. It's also in general the stress you experience psychologically from your work maybe, or from studies or whatever, or from the argument you just had with your partner. You need to recover from those things as well. Otherwise, at some point, you're going to get things like, burnout like symptoms or stuff like that. Even though that is a separate, complicated subject as well. Some people have suggested that burnout is just a variation of depression because they have so much overlap. Other people say, no, that's not true because burnouts usually happen in the context of work and career. So there's some discussion on that. But the basic premise is still there is a lack of balance between stress and recovery. So the more stress you put on yourself, the more you need to de-stress. That could be training versus recovery. That could be working really hard throughout the day, but then relaxing all evening and not doing anything, or doing specific things that help you de-stress, like meditate or taking ice baths, whatever. You need to make sure there is a certain balance in there that makes everything sustainable for you. Third one, another example, working environment and methods. This was interesting. A while back, I came across an article that mentioned a few recent studies that suggest that a lot of the ziekteverlof, people taking days off from work because they're ill, are not because the people are unhealthy, but because of the working environment, because they're basically the boss sucks. And that was a bigger impact when you just made sure the working environment improved and that your boss learned how to be a proper manager. That had a better, more positive influence on people staying at the job instead of going home ill. That had a more positive impact than when they provided free fitness opportunities and stuff. So you have all this company fitness and stuff that did not really help as much as they hoped, because people who want to do sports or are busy with their health, they're going to do that anyway, regardless if the company offers it or not. And those that need it most, those are the people who normally don't do it. They need it the most, and they're not doing it. And that's kind of relates to the whole thing about information not being enough. We know we need to eat our vegetables. We know we need to do sports. We know we shouldn't smoke. Everyone knows this. Still, we have 40% of the Dutch people smoking, 80% of the people not eating enough vegetables. It's not an issue of not knowing. We know what we need to do. We just don't. And that's, again, the behavioral part. Fourth one ties in with the second one, routines that help you de-stress, whether that's meditation or anything related. That really depends on the person. It's just a matter of trying out. We know that some things help better than others, but it depends on the person. Before we go to sleep, does anyone have any question regarding the first four?
Yeah, I was a bit distracted, but you said something about ice baths or something. What was that part?
Oh yeah, some people for recovery, they want to do cold showers, ice baths, breathing techniques, and so on. Some of these things work, some of these don't. Some of these work physically, some of these work mentally, and so on and so forth. So I really leave it up to, as long as it doesn't have a negative effect, right. I leave it up to personal experience. So for example, ice baths, when done properly, they help you recover faster to some extent, but they also blunt the adaptation. That means that you do a heavy workout, you get inflammation in your body, that's normal, and you recover and it makes you better. You have more muscle, more strength, and so on. But you have to wait until that's done before you can train again, at least to some extent. But if you take an ice bath, the recovery time is shortened because you stop the inflammation, but you also stop the process of getting stronger and more muscular. So ice baths are great if you have to train twice in a day, for example. You can do an ice bath in between, like some professional athletes do. Right. But in general, I would not recommend ice baths specifically. It's not that it's bad, it's just that you kind of waste a bit of the training effect. But yeah, if you really enjoy it, it's not going to kill you. So if it psychologically helps, that's already a reason to do it, obviously. More questions regarding those four?
No, that's fine.
Cool.
No.
Sleep hygiene. Sleep quality and quantity need to be proper. How do you do this? Your bedroom needs to be cool, like somewhere around 18 degrees Celsius or something, 17, 18. It needs to be cool, but not cold, definitely not too hot. You need, ideally, you sleep at the same time every day. You wake up at the same time every day. You want to sleep as uninterrupted as possible. So don't drink a lot before you go to sleep, because then you have to get up to pee. Those are all things that can help with tremendous amount of things, because better sleep means less pain sensitive. It means more focus, less irritable throughout the day, better recovery from training, and I'm probably forgetting a lot of other stuff. So yeah, fix your sleep, and it has a positive impact on pretty much every single thing you do in life. Questions about sleep, because this is a very complicated subject, but this is what it boils down to.
No, it's clear.
Oh, that was easy.
Yeah.
Just
Right. Next one, self-care. Self-care is a very broad term. It's easily to neglect it. It's easy to underappreciate it. So I had a few random examples. So gum health, so regarding your teeth, using toothpicks and brushing your teeth twice a day is the general recommendation. I personally have not touched a toothpick in probably like 4 or 5 years. And that sucks. It's not just because of the health of your teeth, but indirectly, it also does more for the rest of your body. Why? If you do not take proper care of your teeth, you're going to get inflammation. You know how your gum starts bleeding at some point and stuff? That's when you get the inflammations. That means you have a wound. Normally, when you eat food, it goes into your stomach, where anything bad that is in your food is going to get killed in your stomach acid. So your body processes it to make it safe. If it gets in your mouth, it comes into contact with the wound. So if you have something like a weird bacteria or whatever in your food, normally your stomach would kill it. Now it goes straight in contact with your bloodstream. That means your body needs to respond to it to make sure it doesn't harm you. You're going to get away with it. It's not going to kill you, but it is going to cause some inflammation throughout your body. And again, like we said before, chronic inflammation has influence on worse recovery, worse quality of sleep, which then makes recovery worse, and so on. So taking care of your teeth also helps with general health. Well, wear a seatbelt. That's basically the category of obvious stuff that we all know, but not everyone does it. But it's very obvious as well, because some things we do for safety, so indirectly they can make a huge impact. The risk is, people experience risk as being low of getting into a car crash, but risk usually means the chance of something happening multiplied by how bad it is. So the chances you get into a car crash is generally not that high, luckily. But if it happens, it can suck. That's why we wear a seatbelt. And of course, this goes for a lot of things, and it's up to you whether you adhere to it or not. If you, I don't know, ride your bike without a light, well, there's a chance the car is going to hit you. But again, it is part of health, because safety is also a part of health. Hygiene is another one. Of course, we want to be clean. We want to shower regularly. We want to be clean because we don't want to smell bad and so on. But if you have improper hygiene, it's also going to have an impact on things like skin health, for example. And you can get things like eczema, and you get things like acne and stuff. Bacteria can clot together and irritate the skin. So the examples with face masks, recently a study came out that if you wear the same face mask for more than 4 hours, it can irritate the skin. So if you wear face masks, you need to replace it after 4 hours, ideally, or earlier. And if you wear a reusable cloth face mask, you should consider it just like wearing underpants or a shirt or whatever. You have to wash it every day, ideally, after every use. You don't want to use the same face mask for a week, because then bacteria can clot. And more bacteria at some point is going to cause some skin irritations and so on. So hygiene is more about being presentable and having a nice smell. It also has an impact on things like skin health. And then there's brain training, and this becomes more important as you get older, but really throughout your whole life it's useful. Simply learning things stimulates your brain, which keeps you sharp until a later age. The less you do with your brains, basically the faster you deteriorate, which is one reason why with a lot of the elderly you see them doing certain brain training games and so on. What I do is learning new languages. I picked that up a few months ago, and it's through Duolingo. It just keeps me engaged instead of just playing video games or doing mindless stuff. So all these things are usually things we don't talk about as much because we think they're obvious, even though we don't always do them. But they do have an impact, so it is worth mentioning. And of course, it's up to you regarding all these subjects. Which ones are you going to invest time and effort in? Which one do you think are worth it? If you don't believe that face masks work, okay, you don't wear them at all. Yeah, I mean, you could do that. If you don't want to wear a seatbelt because you think it's a free country, you should be able to do whatever you want. I mean, sure, just don't complain if you like fly throughout the front window when you get hit by a car, but that's up to you. Regarding all these subjects, just from here, you always have to find your own balance. How much effort are you going to invest in each of these things, and how much are you going to see in return for that? You always have to keep in mind two things. What do you think is fun, like sports, or interesting, like maybe playing around with your diet? And what do you think is important? Because I don't know a lot of people who enjoy using toothpicks, but if you think it's important, then that's another good motivation to do it. So we are moving on to the Q&A, but I'm going to keep it on overview so you can see the subjects. Does anyone have any questions regarding any of the things we talked about? If not, that makes it super easy.
Yeah, what is the
It was so clear.
what is the main thing? What is the main thing you could tell me that how you can prevent injury in CrossFit? Because this is obviously a lot, like injury in CrossFit is something that you hear about a lot, you know. So I'm wondering what are the key things you can do to prevent injury?
So before I answer that question, do you know why you hear so much about injuries in CrossFit?
I actually don't. Maybe because it's new and high intensity. It's fairly new and high intensity.
Yeah, that's actually a pretty pointed answer. Especially the fact it's new, and it gets a lot of shit because in theory it has a high potential for injuries. However, soccer has generally more injuries than CrossFit. But when was the last time you ever heard people say you shouldn't do soccer, it's bad for you? You don't hear that. It's a cultural thing. CrossFit is new. It's scary because you fling around weights at a high speed and so on. But so far, there's nothing called a CrossFit injury, but we do have something called a soccer injury. You know, when you twist your knee and you damage your meniscus and your ACL, your anterior cruciate ligament, voorste kruisband. When you twist your knee, it's what we call a soccer knee in Dutch, because it happens so much. If you look at injury rates, the sports with the biggest injury rates are sports like rugby. Why? Because you constantly have people bumping into you at high speeds. So injury rates in CrossFit are actually not that high. But because it is new and people think it's scary and they don't understand it, and granted also because some people have no idea what the hell they're doing, then yes, the risk of injury is bigger. So what do you do to prevent injuries? Well, you need to make sure that whatever you do, your body is prepared to do it. If you have super stiff shoulders, super simple example, and your shoulders are so stiff that you cannot get them here, and your shoulders cannot get you any further than this, please do not do all these snatches and jerks, because you're just going to hurt yourself, because you're going to do all this weird stuff that you're not prepared for. You're going to kind of force your shoulder in that end position and so on. That means at some point you're just going to hurt yourself. So that means proper scaling. And that means don't do things you cannot do. Yes, you must push yourself hard, but there's a time for pushing and there's a time for backing off. Super example, how long have you been doing CrossFit?
Almost a year.
Right. So I assume you are intimately familiar with the snatch and the assault bike, right?
Yes.
So for the assault bike, you're not going to hurt yourself. You have to work really hard to injure yourself with an assault bike.
Yeah, you will get hurt in the end, but it doesn't hurt you.
Yeah. Yes, it hurts, but you don't get hurt. Exactly. A snatch, however, well, depending on the situation, you could put yourself in weird positions that your body is not used to, and that's how you're going to hurt yourself. Or maybe your technique is so bad that you're going to drop a barbell on your head. That is why in snatches, we scale very aggressively with, hey, do this variation instead of a full snatch, or do less weight, otherwise you're going to hurt yourself. For an assault bike, well, maybe you're going to throw up. Other than that, you're not going to get an injury from an assault bike. I mean, it's theoretically possible. I've never seen it happen, but I have seen people get hurt from snatches. And again, that's just a matter of properly scaling. Sometimes if someone cannot do snatches, let them do cleans instead if they can. Or if they cannot do that, do completely different things. As long as it helps them with what we call an intended stimulus, like if it helps them get fitter, if it helps them reach their goal, but without the added risk of injury, dude, please just scale, even if it's boring or even if you wanted to do the workout the way it was planned. Proper scaling is the thing that separates a random group class from actually doing CrossFit in a productive way. That's why, at least at UnScared, we're always about scaling this, scaling that. And sometimes it's boring, but we do that with the idea not to hold you back, but to give you what you need. Because the only thing that's even better than that is having a custom-made program, like a one-on-one program. That's the best thing you can have because it is catered towards you. But of course, it's like 5 times as expensive, and you need your own training material and stuff. So when we have a group class, you need to use scaling to work at your level, so you can ideally become fitter, but also to prevent injuries. So that answer was longer than was necessary, but basically scale properly.
Nice, thanks.
Cool. More questions regarding any of these subjects?
How do you start with changing your bad habits in good habits? Is that more starting with the mental part, or just by just doing it and you get used to it and it becomes the new normal?
That's a very complicated question, but to put it very short, what you need to do is interrupt and override bad habits. Just quitting a bad habit is very hard. It's not impossible, it's just very hard. Just look at the people that try to quit smoking, they can't. It's just very hard. So you need to interrupt bad habits or you need to override bad habits. So interrupting a bad habit, if you are the person who just, I don't know, super simple example. You go to parties a lot and you keep snacking whatever you see. There's nuts in front of you, you eat nuts. There's cheese in front of you, you eat cheese. You can interrupt that bad habit by, for example, chewing gum, because you're not going to put cheese in your mouth if there's gum. Now, if you really are hungry and you really want that cheese, you're going to throw away the gum and you're going to eat the cheese, sure. But simply chewing the gum is an interruption in your habit that gives you a moment of conscious thought to make a conscious choice rather than mindlessly doing whatever you were doing. So that's interrupting. And overriding could simply be setting yourself up for doing something else. So if your habit is, hey, it's late at night, I'm grabbing chocolate from the closet. Instead of buying chocolate, you're going to buy fruit. So your only option is to buy fruit or go outside to buy chocolate. I'm lazy, so I'm going to go for the fruit. So it doesn't work for everyone, but it's just one random example of how interruption and how overriding are steps towards changing your habits. And underlying is that you always need to rearrange your environment, because if you just say, well, from now on I'm going to do this, that may not be enough, because you're always going to be tempted. You have impulse for something. Maybe you have a trigger, like seeing food can make you eat food, or maybe you're with friends and you're more likely to drink beer when you're with friends. So you have triggers that you need to be mindful of. Sometimes you're just not, sometimes it's a semi-unconscious habit. You're not aware of when you're doing it until after you've already done it. So you need to make sure that your surroundings are arranged for that. And a simple example is, if you want to avoid eating candy, don't buy candy. Because even if you then decide to go out of the door and buy candy, at least you had a moment of conscious thought to make a conscious decision, rather than just grabbing the bowl of candy that's in front of you. I once coached someone at work. They would always have like this bowl of candy and chocolates like at their working table. Of course, you're talking to each other, you're working, you're going to grab one, and a minute later you're grabbing another one. It's subconscious, and before you know it, you've eaten like 500 calories of candy. But if you have to stand up, go to a different floor, or go outside to buy it, you have a moment where you have to be conscious about it. And again, that's another form of interruption and rearranging the environment that kind of facilitates behavioral change. Does it answer your question?
Yes, yeah.
Cool. More questions? Otherwise, we're going to wrap up.
Yeah, you already answered all my questions. Thank you.
Sick.
Thanks.
All right. If you guys have more questions, we have the nutrition seminars on YouTube that I mentioned earlier. There's also another webinar on YouTube about training planning. So that talks a bit about injury prevention and how often to train during the week and so on. So you might want to check that one out as well. Otherwise, of course, we always have private coaching available if you're like, well, I want a custom nutrition program, whatever. Just hit us up. Thank you for your kind attention, and I hope to see you at UnScared or something soon. Take care, guys.
Yes, thanks.
Thanks.
Take care. Bye bye.